Okay, we are going to pick up where we left off, and we're going to go through and start on this problem right here. Are more than 80% of Americans right-handed? In a random sample of 100 Americans, 87 said that they were right-handed. So if you remember our steps, the first step is checking our necessary assumptions. So first of all, we ask, are the observations independent? In this case, we said that it was a random sample. So we can say, yes, it was a random sample. The next part was to then check to see if we have at least 10 successes and 10 failures. Well, our n in this case was 100, so we have 100 for both of those n's. Then we want our null value. So remember, your null value is part of the claim. And in this case, our claim is that more than 80% of Americans are more than 80% of Americans right-handed. So that 80% is your null value, but remember, we always have to turn it into a decimal. We're not using the percentage. So 100 times 0.8 is equal to 80, which is greater than or equal to 10, so yes. For the next one, it's actually 1 minus the null value, but 1 minus 0.8 is 0.2, so I just went ahead and skipped that. But it is 100 times 0.2, and that is equal to 20, which is greater than or equal to 10. So we're good to go for number 1, or our first part. All of our assumptions are okay. We then write the original claim. And the original claim is are more than 80%. So that's where you've got your claim that the P is greater than, your probability is greater than 0.8. So right there, that's your claim. The next thing you need to think about is it the alternative or right? And that's where you can kind of go up here and say, well, we said greater than. We didn't say greater than or equal to, we just said greater than. And so greater than is an alternative. So right there, we knew alternative. And then hopefully on your own notes, you wrote in that when you have a greater than, you automatically are dealing with the right side. So that's where you get right. So the next part is calculating that Z statistic. So you take your point estimates. So which one is your point and which one is your null value? Well, we know that the null value comes from your claim. And in this case, your claim was that 80%, which is 0.8. So we know our null value. You can just go ahead and put your null value everywhere it goes in the formula. So if this one's your null value, then you've got a random sample of 100 Americans, 87. Well, because they're not giving you a percent. Now, if they gave you the percent, you wouldn't have to find it. So if they had a random sample, if they said 87% said they were right-handed, then you'd be good to go. Or if they said a random sample of 100 Americans, 30%, well, you would know it's 0.3. In this case, because they're not giving you the percent, you would need to take 87 divided by 100 to get that 0.87, which is where this is coming in. So I just want you to be aware, though, that if they said in a random sample of 100 Americans, 60% said that they were right-handed, you wouldn't take 100 times 0.6 because you're looking for the 0.6. That's the part that you want. So you would just take 0.6 and put it into the equation. So go ahead and do this out. Now, it's really important that you do get this correct answer, because if you don't, it means you're not putting in enough parentheses. So one thing to remember when you're putting it in your calculator, make sure and put a set of parentheses around the 0.87 minus 0.80. Have your division line, and then set up extra sets of parentheses around this part right there. All right, and to help you out with that calculator part, here you go. This is how it would work in the calculator. So you see all of those extra parentheses. I literally do have parenthesis 0.87 minus 0.80, parenthesis divided by, parenthesis, square root, parenthesis, 0.8 times 0.2. I just went ahead and did the math of the 1 minus 0.8. Close the parenthesis, divided by 100, our sample size. Close the parenthesis, close the last parenthesis, and you get 1.75. So make sure if you're doing it in your calculator, there are all of the different parentheses you need when you're entering it in. So I just want to make sure that you've got that. Okay, so once we've got that 1.75, what do? Well, that's when we go and take it into our probability calculator. So here we go, probability calculator. We're going to do 1.75, click calculate. Okay, so now what are we looking for? Well, if you remember, sorry, we are looking for the right side, correct? Okay, so we come over here, and the right side is that answer right there, 0.040059. So there you go, 0.040059 is our p-value. We then ask, so our step 5 to decide, is p less than 0.05? So is 0.040059 less than 0.05? Yes, it is. So there is enough evidence. There you go. But in step 6, you remember step 6? It doesn't matter what we did with p. The only thing that matters in step 6 is this alternative or is this the null? In this case, it is the alternative, so it's a support. Remember, that's the only thing that matters, is this alternative or null. That's what determines this right here. So how we would write this out is that there is enough evidence to support the claim that more than 80% of Americans are right-handed. So that's where the is comes in, and that's where the support. And then you just kind of plug it in with your claim. So hopefully that made sense. The next thing we're going to look at then is this additional examples. So one thing, especially looking at your quiz, you're going to get something like this. And the thing that's important to note is that all 3 of these are all related to each other. So to start out, based on a p-value of 0.137689, there is or is not enough evidence to support the claim that more than 60% of people feel global warming is caused by large industry. All right, so this is the first part. So for this part, the is or is not, if you go back to your notes, the only thing we're looking at is this p-value less than 0.05 or greater than it. It is greater, so this is an is not. Then when you get to whether you reject or support, that's where you have to look at your claim. So we've got the claim is that more than 60% of people. So this is where you have more than 60%. P is more than 0.6. Well, if you look at this more than, that is an alternative. So you know that if you're using alternative, that you are going to support. So there you go. That's how you answer the first part. Not too bad, right? And I do show the work down here for that first part. So when we're going to the second question, or the second part of this question, they ask, based on a p-value of blank, there is or is not enough evidence to support the claim that less than 60% of people feel global warming is caused by large industry. We might look at that and go, like, how am I supposed to figure out what the p-value is? Well, because all of these questions, remember I said they're all related, what you need to think about is this p-value. So you have this p-value, right? And you know that it is, because of this claim, right-tailed. So what you do is come over to your handy-dandy probability distribution calculator, and you know that it's a right tail. So you're going to enter in the 0.137689 into the right side and click calculate. So now we've got our different probabilities. But how do we know which one we're looking at? That's where we have to come and look at this claim. Because you remember, the claim tells us whether we're looking at the right side, the left side, or both sides. So if we look at the claim, we've got the claim that less than 60% of people. So even though this is technically part of number 3, less than, p is less than 0.60, is alternative, and a less than is left-tailed. So when we go back over here, we know the left side, or the left tail, is this value right there. So in this case, that is our p-value right there. So then There is or is not, well, that's when you come back to this p-value. That p-value, here we go, number 2, the p-value is greater than 0.05, so it's an is not enough evidence to. Then we get to reject or support. Remember, the only thing we look at right here is it alternative or null? It is alternative, so we support. There you go. So for the third part, we're still using that same p information, the same probability information from the first part. So when they say based on a p-value of, well, in this case, we're still using these right here. We just have to figure out which one of these values we're using, but we're still using these from the original question. So we look at our claim, and our claim is that 60% of people feel global warming is caused by large industry. So 60% of people feel. Well, that's an equal statement. We're not saying 60% of people don't feel, or 60% or not 60%. We're saying 60% is equal to. We're equaling here. So you've got P is equal to 0.60, which an equal to is always your null. And if you think about the alternative, which is the not equals, that's a both sides. So you remember I said if you get a null, you come up here and you look at the null value, you go over to your opposite, or your, not opposite, but your complementary, which is your not equal, and not equal is both sides. So down here, it is both sides. So go back to that probability table, and both sides right there is the 0.2753. So you come back over here, you've got 0.275378. That's your p-value. There is or is not. Well, that one, if you look at it, is definitely larger than 0.05, so it is not enough evidence. So then when we come over here, remember, all we do, we don't worry about the p-value. We look at whether it was a null or alternative. In this case, it was the null, so we do reject the claim that 60% of people feel global warming is caused by large industry. So we would say that based on the p-value of 0.275378, there is not enough evidence to reject the claim that 60% of people feel global warming is caused by large industry. And there you go. We just worked through all of those example questions. Hopefully that helped.